Welcome to Season 4, Episode 13 of the Sunday Extra podcast. And my name's Jeremy. I am going to be your host today. Sitting around the table with me, I have Pastors Brian Kropp.
Hello!
Pastor Jake Myers.
Howdy! And,
of course, our lead pastor at Hope Church, Matt Sturdivant.
Greetings.
And so I obviously didn't plan that out too well ahead of time because, Brian, you became plural pastors.
I am.
You're pastors.
Well,
pastors.
You know, I've been eating
Brian
too
Kropp.
much as it is, so
Yeah.
that'll work. I could be big enough to be pastors, is what I'm saying.
Wow.
Well, yeah, I mean, what I heard was you were going around the table, like the pastors.
That was the idea.
Plural of all-encompassing. Yeah. So I think
There we go.
You know,
Yes. We're all pastors
it
here.
made sense.
Yeah.
It made sense to me.
You know, in the intros, how hard would it be to have like a basketball intro for us? I think that'd be pretty simple.
Oh man, that'd be
Like
fun.
with the lights and the songs and things?
At least the songs and things. I mean, it doesn't have to be like the 90s Bulls because that's what everyone does.
That's what I just thought of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. But, anyway.
It would not be hard in the editor. It would be hard in this room.
Okay. I'm going to talk to the producer.
All right. You got to talk to the building guy about getting like some some better lights in here.
Okay.
You know that guy? You think you could get it on his schedule?
That guy is just being held by the budget. So, you give that guy the budget and he'll do it.
This one's going to be sponsored by tithing.
Wow.
Welcome to Season 4, Episode 13 of the Sunday Extra podcast.
I was afraid you were going to just jump straight to episode 14. We're like, so Easter was last Sunday, and
But speaking of Easter, great segue there. This week, as of our recording, this is Easter week, so we are just a few days away from Easter. Everything here at the church is Easter prep, Easter prep, Easter prep.
Oh,
how are you guys doing?
I think good. We did the Easter prep event on Sunday, and I was talking with the lady who's was over that whole event and kind of project managing all of the Easter volunteer activities. And I think we had the most people for that event that we've ever had. And it seemed like we got done early.
Yeah.
So not only did a lot of people show up, but there's a lot of hustle, there's a lot of teamwork, there's a lot of can-do attitude. She was telling me about, I think it was kids, maybe students, like they'd have to go do a thing. They'd run back to her like, okay, I'm done. What do I do next?
I love it.
Take it off, come back, like, okay, now what?
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I love what you said in the newcomer reception. So we're going around as pastors, and Pastor Matt's like, introduce yourself, Pastor Luke, Pastor Brian, myself. When we came to you, I believe you said something effective. I really love Hope Church because they put action behind their words. And this is like pre-Easter prep day, or happening at the same time. And so then I get out of the meeting and I walk out, I see all this people at 2 p.m. Like church ended at 12, 12:15. Yeah. And, 2 hours later, people are here hustling. I just thought it was a great testament to something you said that you love about Hope Church. And I literally get out of the room and see it happening.
Yeah.
So I loved all the people like Easter prep day. So it was awesome. I'm getting excited. I'm just whacking my mic everywhere.
Man, we have to be careful here, or Jake might get a leg kick in. Careful, Brian. Careful.
I was thinking that, like, when you were talking, Jeremy, I think as you were talking, tables are getting wheeled out behind us.
Right.
Didn't some people come in the middle of our time, and they're just like, don't mind us. We're going to get
setting up the
we're going
Easter
to the
parking
closet in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That was good.
Go do it.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's definitely the time before Easter. The, spiritual warfare angle of things is kind of ramped up a bit. Thought it was interesting going back to last week. So this is even before Sunday, but I get a call from Brian at it's like 8:00 on Thursday night. You called me, and I was like, Brian's probably in rehearsal I don't know if this is a good call or a bad call. And, you know, it was just one of those calls. And you know, I mean, it wasn't awful, but Brian was like, so when we went to move the podium off the stage, it snapped in half. And, you know, it lasted, 5.5 years or something like that. So then, you know, we ordered one that night, found the other one. Obviously didn't come by Sunday, and we'll see if,
no, it's here.
It was here.
It's here. I assembled it earlier today.
Wow. Okay. So there you go. Well, so there's that piece, you know, like physical things can break and all those. But then, you know, I shared in the second service, man, my family has been getting hammered by health stuff. So started, like 2 weeks ago when Jessica and I were, the last night that we were in Canada, we were getting ready to go to our last meeting with a missionary couple up there working with university students. And we're literally like walking into the restaurant. Like, I mean, it's just like open the door and my phone's ringing and it's my father-in-law. And I was like, that's probably not going to be a good call, you know, because the kids had been with some friends and just got dropped back off with their grandparents. And we still had, you know, one more night we were away. And so my son had a fever and so he was down like all of that last week. And then my wife and so Friday though was actually kind of it was an okay day. It was the point, you know, between things where he was feeling good and we actually went, he's got a hockey game tonight and we took those other hockey skates as far as they could go in terms of the size. So we went and got him some new skates on Friday. And I decided I got myself some skates too.
Nice.
I got a stick. So watch out, world.
Oh, you know.
Man. Anyway, so then we get home, and Jessica takes Kenzie to gymnastics practice, and she's kind of like, she's texting me, and she's like, "Man, Kenzie's she seems like going like half speed, you know." And well, we get home that night. She gets home from practice. She got like 101, 102 fever. It's like, oh, she actually did pretty good then. And we didn't know she was sick because she was fine. She didn't say she was sick. I guess she just started feeling bad. So that started her. And then, you know, this is where, like, guys, you know, it's really sad for the families when we're the only ones healthy. Like I'm on behalf of all men, I'm sorry to the wives and mothers and children when dad, husband is the only one left standing. Mm-hmm. So,
how many meals of macaroni and cheese have there been so far?
None of those. Well, we also, the kids have some food allergy issues, so we have to be very, you know, selective with some of those things. But anyway, so you can pray for me that we're in the window now. It's Tuesday afternoon that we're recording this, and I'm like, God, let me stay healthy till it's Sunday afternoon. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but I mean, that's just part of the normal thing. And there's been other car issues with different people and other health things. That's just the time because the enemy wants to distract, discourage, take away from the prep work and you know, to make leading up to an Easter as ineffective as he can try to make it, because he knows he's defeated, and he knows that a lot of people every Easter Sunday will get to hear the gospel in all the Bible-believing churches all over the world. And you know, it's not unique to us. Talk to friends who are pastors in other cities and other states, and they're all going through different things too. So if you're listening and you stop, pause, pray for us around the table, pray for our families, pray for all the rest of the staff and the leaders, because we need prayer going into this weekend.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, speaking of this last Sunday, we were looking at...
Man, I'm really teeing up all these segues for you, huh, Jeremy?
I know. This is so easy.
It's almost like we planned it, maybe.
Yes.
Huh?
Let me see what you typed next. No, I'm looking at the note sheet. This last Sunday, three chapters in the book of John. We've been going through the book of John straight through. We're just about to the end here. This was chapters 17 through 19. So there was a lot in there. I'm going to summarize. But your big idea from Sunday, for somebody, if they haven't listened to the sermon or if it's been a couple days, the big idea from this passage is Jesus' final hours reveal both the cost of our salvation and the choice every person must make about it. And so it's looking at, really there's three different venues or three different episodes that happen in these passages. The first one was the prayer of Jesus. This was in the Garden of Gethsemane. Is that right? Oh, now I'm second guessing.
This is still in the upper room.
Upper room. The prayer of Jesus.
High priestly prayer.
This is why
you're thinking of the prayer that's not recorded in John, where Jesus is saying, "Father, if there's any other way to let this pass, but not my will be done."
Right.
That prayer was in the garden, but that's not one John recorded.
Okay. See, as evidenced, I am not actually.
Jeremy's going freestyle today.
Yeah. But the first episode in John 17 was the prayer of Jesus. This happened late Thursday evening after the Last Supper. And you made the point that Jesus prayed for some specific things. First, he prayed for himself. Then he prayed for his disciples, that they would have protection, joy, and sanctification. But then really interesting, Jesus also prayed for future believers. So in a sense, praying for us all the way back, 2,000 years ago, Jesus praying for us that we would have unity. And then the second episode was the betrayal, arrest, and trial of Jesus. And this happened through the night Thursday into Friday morning. This is when Jesus was taken to trial and he was beaten and everything else. So during this time, Jesus is arrested. He stands before the Jewish leaders. He stands before Pilate. And then you see Peter's failure, where Peter denied knowing Jesus. And so you can read about that. And then the third episode is the crucifixion, death, and burial of Jesus. And that happens in chapter 19 of the book of John. So this happens early morning on Friday into the late afternoon on Friday. So basically throughout the day on Friday, you made the point that he is the king on the cross, and there was the placard over him. And then Jesus announced that the work is finished. And then the burial of Jesus. And that's where it leaves off for Easter Sunday next week. But then just briefly going over the why does it matter? What does it mean for me? Number one, Jesus chose the cross for us. And then number two, the cross finished the work of salvation. And when Jesus said, "It is finished," he was declaring that everything necessary for salvation was fully accomplished. And you hung out on the Greek word, I'm going to say it wrong, but tetelestai, something along those lines.
Yeah, pretty good.
And
so this is where I got really fired up. And I was like, we needed to do a pulse check there.
So you jumped into that. And then number three, the final, why does it matter? What does it mean? Well, every person must choose what they are going to do with Jesus ultimately. So I know with 3+ chapters, there's a lot that you wanted to get into that you weren't able to. In fact, you specifically talked about a chart on Jesus's highly priestly prayer. And I don't know if I'm saying that right, but there was a chart that you said you wanted to come back to. So let's start at the chart, and then we can get into anything else that you didn't have time to on Sunday. So Matt, go.
Okay. And man, we almost broke a record on Sunday, huh Brian? was like,
Did we?
I think it was like 59 minutes and however many seconds.
Oh, wow.
I mean, there was a lot to cover, especially kind of prepping for, the next Sunday. Yeah. So it was a little unusual message in a sense, but I was like, man, if it had just gone like a few more seconds, it would have
been a whole hour.
Clicked over to a whole hour. But yeah, so, this high priestly prayer that is in John chapter 17, this is where it really gives us a window into Jesus' heart. What's he thinking about? What's on his mind before he's going to go to the cross? But so the chart sort of categorized a few things. I had a column for the Father gave to the Son. Another column was the Son gives believers, and then the Son asks the Father to. And again, it's just a way to kind of think through. The first sort was Jesus prays for himself, he prays for his disciples, and then he prays for future believers. That's all in there. It's just another way to kind of think about the prayer. So the chart, I think we linked to it in the digital version of the notes. I saw a lot of people take a picture of it. On Sunday. But so what does the Father give to the Son? Well, he gives authority to give eternal life. He gives him the people out of the world. The Father's the one that gives the Son the work to accomplish. He gives him the words, he gives him his name, and he gives him glory. What does the Son give to believers? Well, the Son gives eternal life. He gives the Father's word. He's a manifestation of the Father's name. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. And then the Son, he also gives a measure of glory to believers. We see that in verse 22 of chapter 17. And then he's also asking the Father for some things. He's asking the Father to glorify him. He wants to finish well. He's asking to keep the believers in the Father's name, to keep the believers from the evil one, to sanctify the believers in truth, and then to make the believers one, which goes back to the unity thing. Mm-hmm. I think, what's interesting is when I talked about, why does he pray for unity? Well, because that is, a demonstration of the reality of Jesus. And if you think about it, I think that, disunity and division, it just destroys churches, there's people who are not followers of Jesus like to point to hypocrisy in the church, right? And what do they usually point to? They point to either the fact that believers are fighting and disunified, or they'll point to individual sin of individual person, right? Well, gosh, if Christians are going to act like that, well, then I don't want anything of that. Well, Jesus prays actually for both of those things. He's praying for sanctification, which we talked quite a bit about. Then he's praying for unity there. But, just a couple of things I wanted to mention. In the prayer too, he gives one of the clearest definitions of salvation. He says in chapter 17, verse 3, this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ who sent him. So eternal life is not just going to heaven and avoiding hell. It's actually having a relationship with God. Yeah. Relationship means knowing him personally. So yes, we can know about God, but it's very different to know about him versus to actually personally know him. But this thing about the manifestation, I wanted to, one other thing I think is interesting, that this prayer, it sort of serves as a bridge between the upper room and the cross. So what we see in chapters 13 through 16 is Jesus is teaching, right? And then chapters 18 and 19, Jesus is suffering. But chapter 17 is this bridge, sort of this almost like a pause, right? But before the storm, there's no miracles, there's no crowds. It's just a whole chapter of Jesus praying. And that shows again that he's not a victim. He was very intentional. The cross was not chaotic. It was part of the mission. And I think it's what's interesting is, as Jesus was going to sort of go do the most important thing, what did he pause and stop to do? To pray. Yeah, it's actually one of the things we see in another one of the gospel records. I don't remember the exact reference at this moment, but you can look it up. what does Jesus do before he picks the 12 disciples? Is he spends time in prayer, right? So you look, the pattern in Jesus' life was before he did anything of significance, he paused and he prayed. So that might be a good lesson for us, huh?
Amen.
I think maybe before we make a big decision, we should pause and pray, or before we go and do something really important, we should pause and pray.
Yeah. Pray before Google.
That might be. Yeah. That might be something we need to do. Yeah. And here's another thing I was thinking about, that if you think about what Jesus prays for, I like sometimes questions are better than answers. Because they make us think, right? You can just give people answers and okay, great. But, so Jesus prayed for sanctification. So I think a question for us is, how are we pursuing holiness? Are we even pursuing holiness? Right. So, but I'll ask it in the positive. How are we? He prayed for unity. So how are we protecting or damaging unity? Because our actions, we can do either one. We can protect or we can actually cause damage. He prayed for mission. So are we actually living on mission? Every day, not just like, it's the week before Easter and people are going to be open. And yes, absolutely. Like if you've not been on mission, be on mission this week. But we want to get to the place that we live missionally every single day. And then, he prayed for future believers, and this connects to the mission. How are we being a part of seeing future believers come into the kingdom? Now, we don't save them. That's not on us. That was Jesus' part. But he actually gives us a role to play in sharing him with others. So, last thing I wanted to say about that chart again is in verse 17 or chapter 17, verse 6. He starts out, "I have manifested your name to the people you gave me." So, sometimes like people use the word manifestation, right, a lot in today's culture. And, so what do we mean by that? What's going on here? So that's why I just wanted to, take an extra minute here. But basically when he says, "I've manifested your name," what he means is that he has revealed who God truly is. Okay. So in the Bible, name isn't just a label, right? To say that he's manifested God's name. Well, God's name, there was a whole lot wrapped up in God's name. In fact, that's why, there's one God in three persons, but in the Old Testament, we have a lot of different names of God. We have Yahweh, we have Elohim, we just go on and on. So God's name, it really has to do with his character, his nature, his identity, his reputation. So you look, the different names of God really had to do in the Old Testament with how he showed up. Was he showing up as protector? Was he showing up as healer? Was he showing up as deliverer? In fact, that's one of the things that I think is kind of unique about when you look at when God reveals himself as "I am" to Moses before he sends Moses to Egypt to deliver the people. One of the things with like "I am" is pretty much, it wasn't just one specific characteristic of God. It was like all of God was there, So just I am. You tell him I am sent you, So what this means though here, go back to what Jesus, when he says this, is he is showing the world what God is like. So that's really when he manifested God, is he is the visible representation of the invisible. I think there's a verse about that too, right? Yes. But that's really what he did. And so this is where we sometimes say, that like the Gospels give us one picture of who Jesus is, what he did, what it means. But then when we get to the letters, they really flesh it out, right? So then that's where Paul, in many of his letters, helps us understand that part. So anyway, I just think there's a whole lot in this prayer, and I spent quite a bit of time there, but obviously, we could have spent even more time. In fact, if we were doing one of those like really long series, we probably would have like just taken that first section of Jesus praying for himself Like those first 5 verses would have been one whole week, because there's literally enough right there. And then we would have to break the other parts down probably into multiple weeks. So there's a whole lot there. But, you know, I think that the big takeaway of this is, you know, what was on Jesus' mind, knowing that the cross was like literally, you know, less than 24 hours away. Like at this point, he had less than 24 hours of life on this planet before he was crucified. And what's he thinking about? He's thinking about finishing well, glorifying God. He's thinking about protecting his followers, that his followers have joy, that his followers are set apart, made holy, sanctified, representing him. And he's thinking about the future believers that are going to come through the work that he's about to do, but on into the future until he comes back again. So that's you know, more of what we could have said on the high priestly prayer.
Wow. How about you guys? Any thoughts, comments on that?
I know it. I think what's interesting about the high priestly prayer to me, because I was in doing the sermon the week before, I was looking at all of the things that happened in the upper room. And I think either the Bible I was looking at is a red letter edition, or something I was looking at where it was just red, so much red, like it's an unbroken monologue, and yet it's so orderly. Like so much of my praying isn't that orderly. It's kind of like shoot from the hip, like, hey, here's a bird that flew through my brain. Let me toss that up to.
I'm so glad I'm not the only one.
You're not the only one either.
Right. So, you know, that he is praying for that. And I think what you said, Matt, on Sunday, of that, that he was praying for us in that prayer of, you know, you tend to hold up the people who, like, you know, like I was reading today in the book of Ruth, and it's listing all the people who were between I think Judah and David, and there's this guy named Salmon or Salmon, depending on how you want to pronounce him. Like, I don't know anything about him. He's nowhere in the Bible except in these genealogy lists, but he made the Bible, right? Like, that's really cool. How would it be cool to meet somebody who got in the Bible? Yeah. We're in the Bible. I mean, I think that's, we're not named, but when Jesus is praying for all those who are going to come after, we're in that list, that we were on Jesus's heart and his mind before he went to the cross is really impactful. And I think even like you said last week in this setting about eternity past, I'd never thought about that before, that all of us were in God's mind eternity past, and that he sent his son so that we would know, you know, all of that stuff. Like we were never far from his mind. It's not an accident that we're walking with him. It's not, we didn't barely make it into the kingdom because we accidentally, you know, someone accidentally shared the news to people they shouldn't have. So we got to skate in.
What are you doing here, Brian?
I mean, we were a part of God's, God wanted us to be a part of his kingdom. Yeah. I was like, I know me enough to know that is amazing, because I am not, my assessment of me is I'm not worth the kingdom, you know, to be thought of that way. So it's pretty cool to be included.
Yeah, I think, I mean, just one of the things I want to come back to what you said. Sometimes people think like, oh, the Bible, you know, it's, well, who's it about, right? It's God's story. Jesus is the central figure, cover to cover. He's all over the Old Testament. You just, you know, maybe you don't know how to look for him there, right? So it's his story, but it's a story that we're a part of, right? So we're not the hero, we're not the central figure of the Bible. It's Jesus. It's the work that, you know, that God is doing, and you know, everything that happened in the Old Testament's pointing towards Jesus, and then everything, you know, there's the story of Jesus. And in fact, I was reading something this morning, then it's you know, I think this commentator was trying to make the point that well, the Gospels are not just biographies of Jesus, right? I mean, they are that, but they're so much more than that. And then this is where what we've been talking about throughout this entire series with John 20:31 is that like there was a reason why he wrote all of this, and it's basically so we would believe, and so that in believing we would have life change. So it's, usually if you read a biography, and I enjoy reading, different biographies of famous people or, historical figures, right? And you can learn from their lives, but your life's not necessarily changed because of that biography, right? So that's where a biography, to call the Gospels a biography, it's not less than that, but it's so much more than that. So, but we're also part of that story. That's where, people couldn't see it, but like I literally, in that particular Bible that I was reading, that's the Bible that I actually got that Bible for Christmas in 2019, right before we go into COVID, right? And then so I started 2020 with a fresh Bible that year. I liked every so many years, I like to like start over with a fresh one because there's parts you underline and then you almost can just not pay as close attention to that, right? So every so many years I like to start with a fresh Bible and work my way through it. But that one, I wrote there in the margin. I'm like, me. He was talking about me right there, and that's so exciting.
Yeah, really good. One of the things I find fascinating is it's just the sequence of events. Like, why did Jesus take that? He's going to the cross. Now, this is my humanity where I struggle. It's like, if I know I have a big meeting or a big presentation, I may be in a moment, but I'm thinking about what's coming. And I don't know if Jesus had that, but I mean, if he's going to experience utter torture in, hours, from now, he took the time, fasting, to pray for you and me and pray for his disciples. That was on his mind. He wasn't, I know if it was me, I would be distracted. I would be thinking about the torture that I know it's coming, but he took the time to be in that moment and pray, be present in that moment. And what I also find fascinating is, why did Jesus pray this in John 17 when he knows he's going to talk to his disciples after the resurrection? You might be like, I would think that, Jesus would be like, so, this is going to happen to me, and we're going to talk about the cross, and and that's it. We're going to go and get it done. But he's he's doing all these things. Why did he do it before the cross and not after? I wonder if it's because of verse 23. In I and them and you and me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me and love them as you love me. I wonder if Jesus is equipping these guys to stay together, to stay unified in that locked room, like to hang together, even though they're tattered and their Savior just died, because Jesus knew they needed to be unified and stick together after the cross. Because Jesus is going to come back, and he's going to come back with a new body and speak to these guys who are fearful, but they're together. And I wonder if there was, like you're saying, there's some unity that need to be driven to these guys to hang together for these days when they don't have Jesus. So I just find it fascinating why he did this now, not after he resurrected. I find it fascinating.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Maybe a Sunday Extra podcast, season 4, episode 14.
Hey, or 13.2.
Looked like you may have had.
Oh no! I mean, I think part of what I was just thinking, Jake, when you said that is, I think it goes back to, what I've said several times, and we've talked about it around this table, is Jesus is playing 4D chess here, right? Yeah. So part of what he's doing is he's modeling for his disciples, and I think even what we just talked about a few minutes ago is like, well, what if we have this really difficult thing coming up, and it's like, hey, Jesus stopped and prayed and asked the Father for help, that he would walk through it in a way that brings him honor and glory. And so we need to do the same thing. Jesus, fully God and fully human, right? Yeah. We're just fully human. So if he needed to pray, we definitely need to pray. That's why I wanted to include that. I almost dropped that quote like on Sunday morning as I was trying to figure out. I'm like, contrary to what maybe some people think, like, Sunday morning, what am I looking for? Is I'm like, how can I tighten things up even more and drop things? So I almost dropped that quote, but I was like, no, I don't feel right, because I want to draw the connection that a godly man needs prayer, but even the God man needed prayer, and how important prayer is in our lives.
Well, I can't remember now what book I read this in. But, obviously we don't fully understand how the Trinity works, particularly in the moment when Jesus is walking on the earth, but he's still part of the Trinity in heaven. Anyway, all that stuff. But it's obvious from watching Jesus throughout the Gospels that he and the Father are in consistent communication. Even so far as saying, to his disciples at the end, like, everything that the Father's told me, I'm telling you. And so, I have this direct link that, obviously we'll get to this probably a little bit on Sunday, but when he's on the cross and he is separated, like, all the sin is thrown on Jesus, and he is the sin bearer for everybody's sin. That is the first time he has experienced separation from the Father. And just, I think there was some video I was watching where it was like, well, on one end, the veil being ripped is a symbol of, like, we have full access to God. But at the other, it's also that, the Jewish tradition of, if I'm in grief, I rip my clothes. Of God is like, the Father is also upset that I've been separated from my son, that he's, been sacrificed. So there's kind of this rending of the clothes. But we live in that 24/7. We are not ever connected to God the way that Jesus was connected. And so, it's interesting, like, we kind of like do through our lives, like, oh, maybe I'll get around to praying about this decision or that decision, whatever. Like, I'm just going to kind of muscle through on my own, not even a consideration for Jesus because of the connection. And we're constantly like, how do I get more connected to God? Because we feel that separation,
Yeah, well, I mean, we could probably get into this in a couple minutes, but I mean, it's more intense than what you just said, because he was never not connected to God.
Right.
Until that moment. Right. Whereas we start out not connected to God, and then we connect to God through Jesus, and then we enter this this process where it's like there's new life the moment that you surrendered to Jesus, but then we begin this sanctification process. So we're never fully like him,
right,
until we go to be with him. But so we're like. This is where too, you see verses, and we talked about this about, Paul talks about working out your salvation, right? You don't work for your salvation, but you work out your salvation. Because you're saved, you do life different. The works don't save you, but they prove that you are saved, right? So then we spend, after we are saved by grace, we spend the rest of our life trying to work that out. What does that look like? Well, Jesus was just connected perfectly with him from eternity past, which, I mean, the whole thing about eternity, like moving forward eternity, like hurts my head. And then you throw in eternity past, and I'm like, I can't even comprehend that. But, but that's part of reality. So anyway, it was, I mean, there's no way for us to fully comprehend all of what Jesus did, what it meant, how he experienced it. Like we can try to understand it the best we can, but our founding pastor used to kind of use the term, certain things are kind of like ants trying to figure out algebra. Like their brains just aren't big enough, right? And there are things about God. He's absolutely knowable. We can know about him and we can know him personally, but we cannot know everything there is to know about God. We just can't.
There's even like I think a strong argument for Jake, you were saying, if I was in the garden and I was like, I'm thinking about the torture and the pain and all the awful, there's a strong argument to say that what Jesus was actually stressed out about was being separated from the Father.
More so.
More than the crucifixion and the scourging and all that stuff. He was more stressed. And what was causing the drops of blood and all that kind of stuff was, I'm about to be separated and I don't know what that is.
Yes. And it blows my mind what you're saying. In verse 5, John 17, like eternity past, like, and now, Father, glorify me in your presence with the glory that I had with you before the world existed. My brain is just blown. It's like eternity past going the other way.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great segue once again. We talked about the priestly prayer, but there were more moments where you indicated that if you had unlimited time, you would have
just a few more seconds
gone a lot further into some of those specific areas. I think this is one that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So what are some of these other areas that you really wanted to dig into?
Yeah. So, there's just so much there in chapter 18 and chapter 19 that, when you're doing a sermon, you've got to stick to the point and you've got to keep it moving, right? And so, we've talked before about I'm the kind of person that I read the footnotes and then I go and read the books that were referenced in the footnotes. I just love learning and I love getting into all the details. And I think what that does is yes, it can be you can just get so far out there where you're like, how does that help you? Mm-hmm. And I have to stop myself. Sometimes I'm like, wow, I just spent 3 hours on this one little thing. Okay, we need to back up and get back to the point. But it also, when you understand context, I know Brian, years ago when we did Strength Finder, context was yours. So when you have the context, you have a greater understanding for things. So I just kind of want to go back through and look at the overall flow of the Passion Week, and then talk about a couple of things, right? So the Passion, that's like a strange term even too, right? About the Passion Week. We think about passion as you're passionately in love with somebody, but really it had to do with the pain and the suffering, and that's what that week was really about for Jesus. So it starts out on what we celebrate as Palm Sunday. He makes the triumphal entry, right? And so he's entering in as the king, and then he's the king on the cross on Friday, and then resurrected on Sunday. And we talk about sometimes, I even mentioned, sometimes you have a long night, right? Sometimes we have long nights, sometimes we have long days, sometimes we have long weeks, right? And then you get to the point you're like, wow, a lot happened this week, And so that was a power-packed week of different things. In fact, I think I sent you guys one of the things I was looking at. So, part of this was, some of this was my prep for our Lord's Supper coming up. So if you listen to this and you come to Lord's Supper, you might get a couple of, some double dipping here. But one of the things I did this for myself, is I was I wanted to look at the week of Jesus' arrest to resurrection, looking at it through all four Gospels. Because, this series we're focusing on John, and we talk about how there's, how John kind of comes at things from a slightly different angle, and they're complementary with one another. They're not in conflict. And it could be Jeremy, from where you're sitting, you've got a better view of the back of Brian's ear than Jake does. You know what I mean? Just because of where you're sitting. And that's kind of what we see. So, there's times where you're like, well, what's going on? And some things show up in, one of the Gospels, but not in the other, and all of that. So, the garden, it's actually interesting. Jeremy, you mentioned earlier the part about the prayer, right? Well, there was a prayer in the garden, but there's not the prayer in John chapter 17. But so we can see the garden late Thursday night. That's Matthew 26, 47 to 56, Mark 14, 46 to 52, Luke 22, 47 to 53, or John 18, 1 to 11. All four Gospels talk about the garden, and they look at it from slightly different angles. What is consistent is, Judas the betrayer shows up, and Jesus is arrested. It's interesting. A couple of them give the account of Peter cutting off Malchus's ear, and others of them don't, and so it's well, it's not that it didn't happen. It's just that, the other authors were they didn't include it, and then you got the trials that Jesus went through. And so what he actually, he actually went through, I just said he stands before the Jewish leaders and he stands before Pilate. That's really all we had time for on Sunday. So I'm going to get into the weeds here, but I think it's a little bit important as we think about this. So late Thursday, after he's arrested, Jesus, we see the Jewish trials. There's actually, we could categorize as two types of trials, Jewish trials and Roman trials. So we see these Jewish trials in Matthew 26, 57 to 75, and then 27:1, Mark 14, 53 to 72, and 15:1, Luke 22, 54 to 71, and then John 18, 12 to 27. And there's actually sort of three of them that he goes through. First, he stands before Annas, the former high priest. And I'm not going to get into so far into the weedsy with that, but there seem to have been some like political relationships with some of the different people and maybe even the Roman authorities. So why does he stand before the former high priest? He's also related to the current high priest, and all that. So there's sort of Jewish trial number one with Annas, and then number two with Caiaphas, who's the current high priest. But then there's the formal before the Sanhedrin. Like that's all of them. So those are sort of three different events that are all sort of given, different nuance depending on which gospel that you're in. But what's common is there's false witnesses who contradict each other. Jesus affirms his identity as God and the Messiah. He's declared guilty of blasphemy. He's beaten and mocked. And then it's with these Jewish trials is when Peter denies Jesus. So he's sort of, hanging around trying to see what happens. And this is the time when Jesus, or Peter denies Jesus. Well, then he gets handed over to Roman trials now. Okay. And, this is early Friday morning. We got Matthew 27, 2 through 26, Mark 15, 1 to 15, Luke 23, 1 to 25, and John 18, 28 to 19, 16. And again, there's sort of three of these. There's his first appearance to Pilate, and then Luke is the only one that records that he actually goes to Herod, because Herod had been wanting to, he'd heard about Jesus. He wanted to see him. He questions him. He's hoping to see a miracle. Mm-hmm. And, it's like little dog and pony show is what he's looking for. And then he goes back to Pilate for this final sentencing. So here he's accused of claiming to be a king, which so there's sort of a couple of things going on here. There's the Jewish religious problem of blasphemy because he's claiming to be God, but then the Jewish leaders are bringing civil charges against him is that he's claiming to be a king. And there's no king but Caesar, right? So all of a sudden now the Jews are like, oh, Caesar's our king, which, there's just a whole lot of, sort of politicking going on there. And Pilate can't find any guilt in him at all. And then he comes back, and there's an interesting exchange in one of the Gospels where, Pilate's own wife is like, I don't have a good feeling about this. I think, and so Pilate, that's what I say. Pilate was trying to not make a decision. You can tell when you read Pilate's interaction and you look at it from the lens of all four Gospels, Pilate does not want to be where he's at right now. He's kind of forced. He's stuck in the middle. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. So then after he's sentenced to death, then he goes in for this scourging, and the soldiers mock him. We see this in Matthew 27, 26 to 31, Mark 15 to 20, and John 19, 1 to 5. So Luke does not talk about this part. So he has this brutal Roman flogging. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. This crown of thorns is placed. They mock him as king of the Jews. They beat him. They spit on him. They pluck out his beard. They do all this stuff to him. And then he goes to the crucifixion, right? So we see the actual crucifixion, Matthew 27, 32 to 56, Mark 15, 21 to 41, Luke 23, 26 to 49, John 19, 16 to 37. And, the rough timeline here is he gets on the cross about 9. He's dead at 3, 6 hours. Okay. Again, we'll come back to that in a minute. And then he's buried, right? And we see the burial in Matthew 27, 57 to 66, Mark 15, 42 to 47, Luke 23, 50 to 56, and John 19, 38 to 42, which I read, most of that. And again, we'll come back to that in just a minute. But there's this, I told you, there's a whole lot going on, right? So trying to understand what's going on here. So that being said, then one of the things I want to like to look at and try to understand is what was this position that Pilate was in? Because it's real easy for us to just read this and be like, oh, well, here's what happened. But unless you understand the context of the political situation and where Pilate was and all that, then it could just seem like, oh, this thing just happened, right? And this is where, when you look in, I believe it's Galatians 4:4, when it says, or 1:4, when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his son. That means that the conditions were just right for Jesus to be born and then to live the life that he was going to live and die the death that he was going to die. So you got Rome occupied Israel, okay, and the Jews hated it. Right. By the time of Jesus, Israel and Judea was under the Roman Empire. The Jews were allowed to practice their religion, but they were not free in a sense. There was an exception clause made for the Jews to practice their religion, but Rome enforced the area. There was a military presence. There was heavy taxation. There was appointed rulers, governors. So the Jewish people, this wasn't just political, it was also spiritual humiliation that was going on. And because they believed that they were God's chosen people, but yet they were being ruled by pagans. Mm-hmm. All right. So that's, again, we're setting the stage to understand the climate. Then you enter in Pilate, and there's this tense relationship going on. He drops into a tense situation already. So he was governor or prefect, AD 26 to 36, about a 10-year period. And his job was to keep the peace, collect the taxes, crush rebellions. Okay, that's part of the job if you're the Roman governor. And he'd already angered the Jews multiple times. I'm not going to go into all of that. But before this moment of like him deciding what he's going to do with Jesus, he had already angered them multiple times, and he was known for being harsh and insensitive, okay? And he had done some things. So you could say that at the time of Jesus' trial, he's sort of on thin ice politically, right? And I mean, it's not like we are strangers to that, right? We see politicians today, making moves where you're like, why in the world did you do that? That's not right, right? Well, I mean, hey, politics is not always concerned about what's right, especially when it's, run by humans who don't know Jesus. So
these officials, obviously they weren't elected, but the people voted by rioting and killing.
Exactly. That's how they voted back then. Yeah. So then you've got the Jewish leaders bring Jesus to Pilate, and they saw Jesus as a threat religiously and socially, but under Roman rule, they could not legally execute someone. Yeah. That's why they had to have the actual government involved. They could not execute someone, and that had to do with the Roman rule. So again, let me just sort of reframe this. There was a religious charge that Jesus was found guilty of, which was blasphemy. So they're like, he's guilty, blasphemy. But then the political charge that they brought to Rome was he's claiming to be a king. So they were trying to present Jesus as a political threat to Caesar. Caesar's our king. Caesar's the only king. All right. So Pilate, he's sort of hesitant. You can see this in John 18:38. Says, I find no guilt in him. Jesus, he didn't look like a revolutionary person. There were no army, no uprising, no weapons. Pilate tries to find multiple ways to get out of this. In fact, this is even why when Luke records that he sends Jesus to Herod, it's almost like, I'm going to send him to somebody else and see if he'll come to the same conclusion, then maybe I can get out of this and I don't have to, and then, but basically his instincts are correct that Jesus is actually innocent, right? But then there's this pressure that's there because it's Passover time. Jerusalem is packed with hundreds of thousands of people. There's sort of these nationalistic hopes that are high at this time. People want freedom from Rome. The crowd is shouting, crucify him, crucify him. And if you don't, you're not a friend of Caesar. So he's sort of stuck in the middle here, right? And it's like, he's trying to appease both sides of, what's going on here. So, and then you got Barabbas, right? Who actually was a criminal, a robber, a murderer, an insurrectionist. And Pilate finally, he finally gives up. And he's weighing all these things, right? He's looking at what's justice, right? He sees Jesus is actually innocent. He's trying to look at stability. He's trying to avoid a riot. He's thinking about his own career because he wants to stay in Caesar's good favor. Because what if these Jews send a word up to Rome to Caesar to say, hey, Pilate let a guy go who's claiming to be king. He had him in custody and he let him go. So basically, this is one of the things he does. This is where John doesn't record this, but he publicly washes his hands, and he's like, which is him saying, this is not on me. This is on you. This is like a symbolic distancing of himself. And then he orders Jesus to be crucified. So, this moment is actually loaded with irony. The Jews reject their true king to avoid Roman trouble. All right. Rome executes an innocent man to maintain the peace, and a guilty man goes free while an innocent man is condemned. Think about the irony in all that, right? But again, this goes back to what we talked about, is Jesus was not losing control of anything. This was the path. This was the plan. This was, as hard as that is for us to comprehend, like this was the way, So we see that's going on. So Jesus, he is he's sentenced to death. He's sentenced to crucifixion. So what I want to do here is I decided I'm not going to go into this. I didn't go into it last week, and I'm not going to go into it on Sunday, because Sunday is going to be all about the resurrection. But what I want to do here is I want to take a minute, and I want us to understand exactly what it is that Jesus went through. So if you're listening to this into the car and you have young kids with you, you might want to pause this part or whatever. I'm not going to be too graphic, but I am going to be real about what Jesus went through here, because our minds cannot comprehend in modern day 2026 America. We do not have a category for crucifixion. Just like we don't have a category for eternity past.
Yeah, exactly.
We do not have a category for crucifixion. So it was literally the worst kind of death known to man at that time. So here's what Jesus would have experienced. Crucifixion was actually invented by the Persians about 500 years earlier, but the Romans perfected it, right? The Romans were like builders and perfecters of all kinds of things, and it was reserved for the worst kind of criminal, because it was the most awful, disgusting, horrible way to die. In fact, here's an interesting thing. Romans, in fact, I was listening to a guy talk about this. So I've not like double checked this, but this guy's like a historian. He said that there's actually some of the best historical evidence of crucifixion is what we find in the Gospels of Jesus. And the reason being that is Romans would not crucify their own people. So they do not have a lot of historical records of like what happened to their people. So Paul, the Apostle Paul, being a Roman citizen, he was beheaded. He wasn't crucified.
Right. Yep.
So like this was so awful that they would not even do this to their own citizens. So first of all, the English word that we use for excruciate actually comes from the Latin verb, which literally means to torture, to torment. Ex is out of, and crux is cross. So to excruciate means to torment as on the cross. I mean, that gives you a picture of how awful this is. Like, you got to invent a new word to describe how painful and how awful it is. So it was an extreme form of suffering. So it literally, like, when we have the word, this is excruciating, well, it comes from crucifixion. Like, that became the benchmark of a type of pain. Right, Jake, you traditionally transitioned out of medical industry, and you got all kinds of benchmarks where you want to see what you base things off of, right? Yeah. So now the cross is like the benchmark of the worst pain imaginable. Yeah. So tell you what, like, this will make us rethink if we say I'm in excruciating pain, because none of us have experienced what I'm about to describe.
Yeah.
All right. So here's the process that Jesus would have gone through. I mentioned he was scourged and beaten, all right? And sometimes we read that it says he was flogged, right? And I don't know about you guys, but I forget, this was years and years ago. There was this, like, I think this might have been when I was in high school or college. This kid, he littered in Singapore. You remember? Yes, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
okay. He littered in and he got flogged, right? Yes. So what that meant was they had a cane and they beat him, and that was the crime. That's not what flogging means here. Okay. So this is scourged. There was like this, they would have a handle, and it wasn't also like these really long bullwhips. I mean, this was actually an intimate thing that would happen. And so there were actually two specialized trained Roman guards that this is what they did. And there was a limit to the number of lashes under Jewish law. If somebody was going to be beaten, there was no limit under Roman law. So actually what they tried to do was try to bring somebody as close to death as possible without actually killing them. But a whole lot of people died during this process. And so, they would like chain him to this thing, and they would go to town. And when one guy was done, the other guy's cocked back ready to go again. So it's just constant barrage of this. And so they had like bone or glass or metal on the end that were meant to do maximum damage, because they had no limit to the number of lashes. Once the back was a bloody mess, they'd flip over and do the same thing again. So there's a really high percentage of people that just died during this process. They never made it to the cross. Then, in fact, if you've used, it's kind of an old movie now, maybe 20 years old, but The Passion of Christ, that awful scene, that was pretty realistic to what it was probably like. And so they're doing that. The guards are mocking him. Then they take this crown of thorns that's got 1.5, 2 inch thorns on it, and they press that down into his skull. And then they're plucking out his beard. And then he had to carry, all that happens, and he's got to now carry his cross to the place of death. Well, a lot of times what we see in the movie is somebody actually have like a T-shaped cross like that. That's not what they would do. But what they would do is they would have just the cross beam that they would carry that. And so Jesus, from the place where the guards beat him, mocked him, scourged him, it was about a half mile that he had to walk from there to the place of execution. And he has this beam that weighs about 100 to 150 pounds. And in fact, he's so exhausted, he stumbled that he cannot do it on his own. So that another guy has to literally carry it for him. And then Jesus, they bring him to the place, and then they nail him to the cross and hoist him up. And sometimes there's debate on like, well, where was the nails? The nails would have gone in the ancient world. The hand was pretty much like all of this part of your body. There's no way that the hand, this fleshy part, could sustain it. So it was more like in through the wrist bones. He gets nailed down. Then they hoist him up. They nail his feet. He's on the cross for 6 hours. And so, Brian, this is what we were talking about, a little bit earlier. What's interesting, and again, I was reading some of this morning, that 6 hours was actually pretty quick to die on the cross. I mean, it used to be for a lot of people, it would be days, many, many hours, if not a couple of days worth. And eventually what would happen was the person would die of asphyxiation. Like they would suffocate, because you finally get tired of having to hoist yourself up to take a breath and then relax down and then take another breath. And which is why they would often break the legs of criminals so that they couldn't do that anymore. And then they would die quicker. But what's interesting, Jesus, he basically died in 6 hours. They were kind of surprised that he was already dead, was actually, one of the things. But when he was on the cross, he had, from eternity past up until that time, had been in perfect fellowship with the Father. Mm-hmm. Right? We talk about the Trinity. We talked about it last week. Again, it's one of those things we can understand, but we can't understand everything about it. Just the perfect love, perfect harmony, perfect unity of the three persons of God. But when he was on the cross, God is holy and righteous, and Jesus bore the sins of the entire world. The entire sin, all of the sins of everyone who had already lived and died, everyone who would live and die. I mean, we're now 2,000 years post the cross, basically, and that's a lot of people in 2,000 years that have lived and died. That's a lot of sin, right? And so Jesus, that's why he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because he is the only person in all of history to ever feel the full weight and measure of the wrath of God. And we can't even comprehend that. And so, he says it's finished. And then again, because he was in control, he basically at that point, he gave up his life, and he died right then. I mean, it is finished, and then he died. And one thing I was reading this morning was kind of interesting. And again, sometimes like commentators, they look at, like, there's historical things you can look at, and then there's opinions put in, right? So this falls kind of in the opinion part, but I thought it was interesting to consider is like, because it was talking about when Jesus is, the soldier stabs and blood and water comes out, which is a medical sign that he really was dead, but that basically, like, he died, of a kind of like a broken, burst heart, in a sense, that he had all that guilt, all that shame. He was separated from the Father, and it basically just like he couldn't live anymore. So he gave up his spirit and he died. And, again, all of that, he willingly did that for us. Yeah. We don't think about that every day, but why did he do that? Because he loves us, because there was no other way. But Jesus did that for us. And then, just one other thing I want to look at here, and that is has to do with the burial, because I think this is important. Sort of read over, the part where there was Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, but it's really fascinating when you think about these two guys that we didn't have time to go into. But Joseph of Arimathea, he was a wealthy, respected member of the Sanhedrin. Okay, he was part of that Jewish ruling council. He was likely from a town called Arimathea, which would be like, Jeremy, you grew up in Tulsa, right? Right. So Jeremy of Tulsa, like Joseph of Arimathea. That's that type of a thing. He's described in Luke as a good and righteous man. Luke also says who had not consented to their decision. So he was likely there during the trial of the Sanhedrin, but didn't consent to the decision of what was happening. John in chapter 19 says he was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews. So he goes and asks Pilate for the body, and he at this point he's associating himself with a criminal, so he's putting his reputation on the line. One thing that was really interesting, if you think about the way that Jesus died a criminal's death on the cross, and so one of the things that was in conflict here was the Romans would typically leave the criminals on the cross and basically just let them be an example to people that would come by, and basically the birds and the animals could have their way with them. Well, that was not part of Jewish burial customs, even for criminals. So there was a place that criminals would have been buried. So a criminal would have a criminal burial. But one of the prophecies we see in Isaiah 53 verse 9, it's like he was with a rich man in his death. So Jesus, a criminal, gets buried in a brand new tomb, of a rich man. Fortunately for that rich man, Jesus only needed it for a couple of days. That's a pretty good deal, right? He's the only person in the history of the world. I'm gonna loan you my tomb for a couple of days, and then you won't need it after that. And then who knows? Joseph could have used it later, right? So that's pretty that's pretty powerful to see even again in that. Well, Nicodemus, we talked at length about Nicodemus, and all of that, but what's just really interesting with these two guys that they were in secrecy, followers of Jesus, and again. Well, it seems pretty clear from the scriptures that Joseph of Arimathea actually he's called a disciple of Jesus. Mm-hmm. Again, if you just look at the evidence and what he did, I think we could conclude that Nicodemus probably was in the end. Right. We don't know for certain, but both of these guys were part of the group that, condemned Jesus, but then they step out from the shadows, they step up, they publicly, take care of burying him. So, I think, those are all things that we don't really have time to get into on Sunday morning, but I think it helps understanding all the context of that.
Yeah, I know we don't have a lot of time, but any thoughts from you guys? There's a lot there.
Well, I think you said this on Sunday, Matt. I think it's easy to sort of feel this, that Jesus sort of got caught up at the wrong place at the wrong time. And if he just hadn't gone to the garden, he wouldn't have gotten betrayed. If he just had, all these things throughout Passion Week, if even before, where he really is forcing the issue. It seems like there's all this external momentum to get him to the cross. You keep reading in the Gospels how the Pharisees were plotting to kill him, and even at some point, we're going to plot to kill Lazarus because all that stuff. And there's really no movement. There's all this chatter, but there's no movement on it. He forces it by entering Jerusalem on a donkey. He forces it by telling Judas to leave. He forces it by arrest me, not them. And I think even to the point of he chose when to die. You didn't kill me. I gave it up. I'm in control the whole time. I think that's, also part of him staying silent in front of Pilate. Pilate's an outsider to all of this mess, right? He's not Jewish. Okay, let me tell you what's going on. Okay, these guys are upset because I'm, and just lay out the whole thing. Nope. Because I think if Jesus explained it, given Pilate's wife's dream, all this kind of stuff, Pilate, no, we are not killing you. I don't want to get my hands messy with this at all. So if Jesus remains quiet, Jesus forces it the whole time. I just find that stellar, that knowing the physical torture, knowing the spiritual torture, his obedience to the Father and his love for us was so great, he did it anyway. Is just, there's no words to understand what Jesus actually accomplished on the cross.
Yeah, and one other thing that I think this is, if you think about this sort of symbolically, metaphorically, the people shout, "Crucify him," and so Barabbas gets to go free. Barabbas, the guilty one, goes free, and Jesus, the innocent one, dies. Well, sort of symbolically, metaphorically, we're all Barabbas.
Yeah.
Those of us who have surrendered to Jesus, now we are in the place that we are the guilty ones who get to go free and live.
Yeah.
And he died in our place. That's really, what this, Jesus died a death of substitutionary atonement. His death atoned for our sins, our guilt, our condemnation. He died in our place. And that's exactly what happened with Barabbas. Now, I don't know that we'll see Barabbas in heaven. Yeah. We might, who knows? Because we don't know anything else. And I think that's one of the interesting things, jumping ahead to the end of, I love how at the end, John says basically, and there were so many other things that Jesus did that, right. We don't have time to get into. Mm-hmm. And it's basically like, that's why I say you gotta have a questions for Jesus list, right? What we have with the scriptures is everything God wants us to have. But it is not everything about everything that ever could be there. Mm-hmm. And what that tells us is, are these the only people that Jesus healed? Probably not. These are the ones God wants us to know about, right? So Jesus did all kinds of other things, but this is what we have in the scripture, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That what is recorded there for us. So it'd be nice to be able to know more things, but we don't. So
yeah, there's just so much here. But coming up. Shifting gears to this weekend, we have Easter coming up. Well, I kind of had to make it my own here. As we get into Easter, just last few minutes, you've talked about the importance of inviting people around as friends, family, people who don't normally go to church or attend church. Is there anything else you want to say here during the podcast about inviting, what we should look for, anything like that?
Yeah. First thing I want to say, I was super excited. I invited everybody I said, hey, give us the names on your connection card. You can give us the name, initials, whatever you want to do of the person that you have and or will be inviting. Okay. So we had, kind of almost a record number of prayer requests turned in period yesterday, which was awesome. But then 104 people. Okay. So 104 people gave names. And that totaled 291 individuals and 27 families. And so the difference is like if I said, pray for my friend Jake versus pray for the Crop family, right? We don't know how many people are in the Crop family because we know the Crop family, but we don't know the whatever family, right? Yeah. So 291 individuals and 27 families. So 27 families, that's probably at least 2 people. And who knows how many. So that was awesome. So I think the thing I wanted to do is just, I've talked about this before. In fact, we talked about this in our Difference Maker seminar that we did a couple of weeks ago. So I just wanted to say this for everybody. When it comes to recognizing people's spiritual openness, it's kind of the idea of what we call the 3 T's and the 4 nots. Okay. Invite anybody and everybody, but these kind of help you recognize kind of maybe where people are, right? So people, they're most open to God when life is unsettled. Okay, there's something in your life that's unsettled, and there's a lot in life to be unsettled about right now. But so the three T's, is under tension, right? So when you have pressure, that exposes some things in your life. So that could be stress at work, that could be a relational conflict, that could be financial pressure, that could be health anxiety. And basically it's when life gets heavy, people start asking deeper questions. So if you know somebody right now who they're under tension, they're having some problems, they could be more open to an invitation because they could be willing to try something different. In transition, change creates openness. That could look like they just moved to a new city. We got a lot of people all the time moving here from all kinds of other places. They start a new job, they get married, they have a baby, their kids are leaving home, they're getting ready to retire, whatever it is, you're in some kind of transition. So when life changes, people are more willing to change because there's sort of this forced change. And sometimes we're like, let's just pile the change on. My wife and I, when we got married in 2002, right? So in the course of like a month, we got married, we moved from Southern California to Texas. We moved into a new apartment we'd never lived into. We started attending a new church, which is Hope Church. And then it took a little bit longer to find jobs, but then we eventually each got new jobs, right? That's a lot of change, right? Well, you can be more open at that point. Or trouble, crisis can accelerate your spiritual awareness, your need for trouble. Trouble can be all kinds of forms: loss of a loved one, maybe some sort of addictive struggle, legal troubles, moral failures. I don't know, whatever it is, but sometimes God uses trouble to get our attention, right? He allows things to happen in our life so we can sense that, hey, we need this. So the 3 T's tell us when people might be open. The 4 nots help us recognize who around us might be ready. So what are those 4 nots? If you hear somebody say they're not doing well, right? It could be they're not doing well internally or externally. Maybe they got anxiety, burnout, depression. Their marriage is under strain. They're just discouraged in life. This person, might be ready. If they're not from around here, they don't have any roots, again, they just moved here. They're whatever it is, they're not from around here. That could be something, a good person to invite. They're not prepared for what's next. Man, when people say, man, I just don't know how I'm going to do it. I'm not prepared. Like that's a big green flag, right? To being able to begin inviting and having spiritual conversations with people. And then if they just say they're not in church, man, you hear somebody say they're not in church, they're disconnected. They may not be resistant. A lot of times people, they're not in church, like it's not because they're a hardened atheist. They're not thinking about it. They don't know where to go, right? Mm-hmm. We want to go with friends. Most people would accept an invitation. That's why we gave out those T-shirts a couple weeks ago. The I love my church, just to tee it up. Somebody's like, hey, what church do you go to, right? That you love so much. Right. And so anyway, so those are the 3 T's and the 4 nots. I just hope that's helpful for people when they're thinking about, and again, this is thinking about people in your own life, right? Again, we say when it comes to inviting, yes, you can invite a stranger that you meet in the grocery store line. That's perfectly okay and acceptable to do. But we're talking about who do you know in your life that they're close to you, but they're far from God, people that God might already be working in their life. And now you can step in and make an invitation.
Excellent. That is fantastic. So speaking of Easter Sunday, we hope all of you can join us at Hope Church this Sunday as we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. Services 9:15 and 11 o'clock on Sunday, and the Saturday afternoon service at 4 o'clock. So hopefully at least one of those fits your schedule. We would love to see you here at Hope Church for Easter weekend. This wraps up episode 13. Episode 13, yeah. Episode 13 of season 4 of the Hope Church Sunday Extra podcast. Hope to see you next week. Have a great week.